But while religion is chock full of delusion, you're right about that. And I have many criticisms of religion. Trust me, I've been a critic of religion for a long time, for most of my life. I'm very much allergic to dogma and to ideology and to conformist cult thinking. So while all of that is true about religion, you're still missing one very important thing. There's one thing that religion is right about, fundamentally. And that is that God is an actual phenomenon, not a figment or a creation of the human mind. That's what you're missing. So be open to that possibility. The key insight I have for you in this episode is that God is an experience, not a belief or a theory. God is an actual experience that I've had, many other people have had, and that you can have. And that's even important for you theists to understand. Because the problem with you theists is that you believe in God so much that you confuse your idea and your image of God for God itself. And that actually becomes your greatest obstacle to actually understanding what God is. All of the preconceived ideas that were taught to you and brainwashed into you through Sunday school or wherever you got your beliefs in God from. So don't think that you're out of the woods yet if you're a theist. Superficially, it seems like I'm agreeing with you, the theist, because supposedly I agree that God exists. But actually, in a certain sense, the things that I'm communicating are closer to what the rationalist and the atheist holds than your pre-rational theistic ideas of God as some bearded man in the clouds. Now, of course, the very first objection we got to answer here is that, well, Leo, what are you talking about? Personal experience? You're saying that you experienced God and now you think you know what God is? How arrogant of you. After all, we know that personal experience, man, that's not reliable. People hallucinate all sorts of things. There are people who have all sorts of psychotic visions and things like that, and they misinterpret them, and they think, sometimes people even think that they're God. So Leo, how can you trust your personal experience? What does this really show? This isn't proof. I need solid, concrete proof. I want a double-blind, placebo-controlled study that shows me that there's a God, if there is such a thing. Because, Leo, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So where's your evidence? So far, all I'm hearing you say is just a bunch of mumbo-jumbo and talking and philosophy, but no real proof. So prove to me, provide to me the tangible evidence, and then maybe I'll agree with you about the existence of God. Such the rationalist and the atheist thinks. And the rationalist actually believes that this is a valid way to think about this problem. Here's the reality of the matter. When you say this objection, you really demonstrate that you don't know and you haven't really thought carefully about what experience is, or what proof is, or even how science works, or how knowledge works. Because in this objection, you're just assuming that proof is a given, and that proof is just an easy thing. It's like you just go and find proof. You find proof for God in the way that you might find proof for some murder. Like you find a knife with blood on it, you do some DNA testing, and then boom, there you go, you've proved it. And in the same way, we can prove God. But that's not how it works. Because when we're talking about God, we're talking about the most fundamental thing ever. We're talking about the origin of existence itself. So as you can clearly see, proof requires that first you have existence. Science and rationality depend on certain fundamental things that need to be in place before they work. See? So what you're not realizing is that proof is actually a second-order phenomenon. We have to build up to proof. Proof is not something we just take for granted. After all, what qualifies as proof? Whose standards for proof are we going to use to prove existence exactly? Your standards, my standards? our community standards, our culture's standards, you're taking all of this completely for granted. Consider that truth or being is prior to proof, because proof itself requires being in order to get itself off the ground. So here's a little analogy for you. It's as though we have Lego building blocks, and we're going to use these to build a castle. So the Lego building block itself, if we have one block right here, this, let's think of it as truth or as being. These are like the atomic particles that make up everything in our Lego building universe. Proof is a second order phenomena in the sense that out of these bricks, we can build a castle. The castle is made out of the little bricks. So it's really an emergent second order, right? You can't have a castle without bricks, but you can have bricks without a castle. You see that? You see how the castle depends on the bricks to exist first? Well, that's how proof works. So, in a sense, when you're telling me that you need proof for God, the critical mistake you're making, it's as though in this Lego universe, by way of analogy, it's as though you're asking me to formulate a brick in the shape of a castle. You see, you've put the cart before the horse. You've misunderstood what depends on what, because you're taking the castle as the primary and the brick as the secondary. It's sort of like you're asking me to prove the existence of bricks to you, because all you've ever experienced are castles. You see the problem there? You've got it backwards. It doesn't work like that. If you're familiar with Kurt Gödel's incompleteness theorem, then you should also be familiar with the notion that proof cannot be systematized or symbolized. Or rather, the truth cannot be systematized or symbolized. And that proof is always a weaker notion than truth. If you want to understand that in a much deeper way, go check out my episode on Gödel's incompleteness theorem. It's a very important discovery within epistemology. And it wasn't just Kurt Gödel, but Alfred Tarski was also instrumental in demonstrating that proof will always be less than truth. The domain of truth is everything, and the domain of proof is a subdomain of truth, because proof itself is part of truth, but not the entirety of it. Another way to explain this to you is, prove to me that you exist. How would you do that? You see, the problem with you rationalist types is that you ignore your own direct experiences and the necessity of your own existence and the fact that you are intimately in the world. You're not standing outside of it as some observer outside the universe looking in. You're intimately in the universe. So it's actually not possible to prove that you exist, because existence is more fundamental than proof. The only reason you think you exist is because you feel that you exist, and that happens through personal experience. Or, for example, try to prove that colors exist to a blind person. Think about that. Think about it for a minute, and what you'll realize is that it's not possible. Because for proof to happen, a lot of stuff has to be in place. For proof to happen, we already have to assume existence. We already have to assume a common base of experiences between individuals. And we have to assume that our experiences are similar enough that we can work with each other, we can build a consensus, we can have standards around what qualifies as proof and what doesn't. These standards can be different based on which community or culture you're a part of, which time in history we're talking about, and so forth, right? So proof is a very complex notion that requires a lot of stuff to build it up. It's made of various building blocks, which themselves cannot be proven.